In the land of Palworld, there are over 100 different pals to choose from, all bringing different skills, stats, and abilities to the table. Now with all this variety, there are sure to be several S-tier pals you can add to your party. But I sat here in my gamer chair and wondered, is there a strongest? A pal so strong that it could destroy anything that stands in its way? Does it even exist? Now I know what you're all thinking. Surely one of the legendary pals is the answer. Or maybe it's one of the rare pals you can find at the sanctuaries. Or simply perhaps just breeding is the only way. But then I found the answer staring me right in the face. Its majestic mustache flowing atop a windswept mountain. And in that moment, that singular moment, I knew the Sweepa was the key. Now if you guys don't know about this adorable mustachioed mass known as Sweepa, they have a very unique partner skill called King of Fluff. This allows them to gain bonus stats for every Swee that you also have in your party. Swee being the little guys that you can see huddled around the Sweepas in the wild. Well, this got the gears turning in my head. How strong could I make a Sweepa? The right Sweepa. So that's what I sought out to do. And trust me, you do not want to miss this tale. But before we jump into it, if you're watching this right now and you're still not subscribed, please consider smashing that button as it really helps the channel and the community grow. Alright, nothing left to do except to sit back and watch the epic tale of King Sweepa. Enjoy. Now the first obvious step in this master plan is to go out and get myself a Sweepa and some little Swee and look to see if this endeavor would even be worth my time. So that's what I went out and did. I quick traveled over to the Investigator's Fork and swiftly captured a good dozen or so of Sweepa and a handful of Swee. Cause you know, I like having options. Once I felt satisfied that I had enough of each and nighttime started to set in, I headed back to my pal box to see what I had collected. And boy was I happy when I did. Now as you probably know, captured pals in the wild can get any assortment of passive skills. Some good, some bad, some mid. So it's really up to the RNG gods on whether or not you catch yourself a keeper. Well, it turns out I found myself the almost perfect pal for what I was looking to create here. Because this Sweepa had Musclehead. Musclehead is a passive skill that greatly boosts attack by 30%, with the trade-off being work speed is cut in half. But in this case, that's totally fine, because the only work that this guy would ever be doing is destroying my enemies. So we're all good there? Now that I had my Sweepa, the only thing left to do to test my theory here was to put it alongside a squadron of Swee and get a sense for how strong it would be in this current, imperfect form. At level 25, my creation was already over 2000 HP with an attack of 550 and nearly 400 defense. Attack was being boosted by almost 80% already. Well, now we're on to something, guys. With my excitement growing, I sprinted over to my Statue of Power to take the next step. I used my collection of Pal Souls to further enhance my Sweepa, him growing stronger and stronger with each new soul. I then immediately went over to the Pal Condenser and took 4 of the useless Sweepas I had found earlier and grinded them up for the cause, passing on their life force to the unstoppable furball that I was creating. At the end of all this, my Sweepa is now up to nearly 2400 HP, 700 attack, and 500 defense. This was good, but I needed more. If you have never used the Pal Condenser before, here's how it works. You can level up a particular pal's stats and skills by sacrificing other pals of the same type, starting with 4, but then doubling each time from 4 to 16 to 32 to 64. Meaning, for my Sweepa to unlock his perfect form, I would have to have him absorb 116 other Sweepas. So like I said, I needed more. And more is exactly what I sought out after. I grabbed my trusty bow, a torch, and as many pal spheres as I could find, and I journeyed out into the dead of night with the sole purpose of finding and catching every single Sweepa in my sight. So things started out well. I would shoot them a handful of times with my bow and toss out a ball praying that they didn't break out. It was all going just fine, but this method was just a little too slow. So in typical American fashion, I went home to get my gun. To hopefully speed this whole process up, you know? But when I did this, I got slightly distracted by a noise I heard echoing from outside of my base's walls. And then I got distracted from my distraction when I saw yet another one through the trees. Wild. Well, anyway, with that astonishing bout of RNG aside, I got back on task. Now packing heat, I returned to the Sweepa stomping grounds and began nothing short of an onslaught. Minutes turned into hours and hours turned into days, as I efficiently and ruthlessly eradicated the entire Sweepa population on this mountain. I spared the little Swedes, of course, solely in hopes that they would soon grow up themselves to become Sweepas and be able to be sacrificed for the cause. And so I continued on, roaming and shooting and catching, and roaming and shooting and catching, until I finally had enough. I immediately hopped back to my PAL condenser and began the process. First was 16 of the newly caught Sweepas, which raised the stats to level 2. And then 32 of them. And then finally 64. At long last, I had seen my creation reach its final form. Well, kinda, not technically. Because I logged on to my server one day and my base was just gone for some reason. So I lost my large PAL souls before I could give them to my Sweepa, which I kinda got tilted about. I could go out and farm more, but I didn't want to. But I'm just gonna push those feelings down for a second and focus on this beautiful boy before me. For what I had created was an unstoppable fluffy force that could not be rivaled in neither strength nor facial hair, possessing nearly 5,500 HP and having an attack of over 1,500 and defense of over 1,000. There was nothing on this island that could stand in my way now. While I could just say all these things with words, it was time to prove it with actions. So I sought out yet again, this time with Sweepa and his homies in my party, to find the most formidable foes across the land and make them submit to my fluffy fury. I started in the desert where I found this Egyptian god just strolling around. But what's a god to a non-believer? I tossed out Sweepa to finally unleash the beast I had created. Sweepa held nothing back, striking the first blow with the newly learned hyper beam that I taught it. Sweepa then immediately followed up that hyper beam with a giant ice shard that encased Anubis in a frozen tomb. When it finally broke free, it jumped back and threw some pebbles at Sweepa, who I swear just chuckled when they hit him. I think this demoralized Anubis, as not too long after he tried an act of desperation, where he began channeling a spirit bomb. But with a cold, icy expression, Sweepa threw out another ice blast, sealing Anubis' fate. When the fight was over, Sweepa gave me a look of dissatisfaction. I needed to find a bigger challenge, a greater foe. My quest took me to the top of a frozen mountain peak, where I found this tower being guarded by this emo kid and his equally emo pet bird. The fight began and I threw out Sweepa yet again. I could see a faint smile peek through from behind the mustache, as it felt like it was finally a worthy opponent. Possessing over 200,000 health and an affinity for listening to My Chemical Romance, our opponents were certainly formidable. It was time to lock in. As the fight went on, I continued to evade the Shadowbeak's attacks, while Sweepa whittled it down. I assisted when I could with some well-placed little pokes of my spear, and made sure to keep Sweepa from taking any major damage. The battle waged on for what felt like hours, but weirdly enough I'm told it only lasted roughly 10 minutes. Every time Sweepa and Shadowbeak's attacks clashed, it sent tremors down the mountain that caused several avalanches. A lot of people were killed. But Sweepa was in that mode. As the clock ticked down, the tide of the battle shifted heavily in our favor, until finally Sweepa saw the opportunity to strike the lethal blow, calling down yet another giant ice shard that sealed the boss's fate. The dust had not even yet settled from the battle with Shadowbeak before Sweepa came to me with a look that said, "I want the Jet Dragon." The last true test in the land. How else would one become legendary except by taking down the most feared legendary there is? So we trekked from the icy tundra to the base of Mount Obsidian for the final test. The only thing standing in Sweepa's way now was the commercial airplane that called this volcano home. So the battle begun. Ice vs fire, ground vs air, mustache vs non-mustache. For as epic as the last two battles were, this fight would truly be the climax of this tale. Now the Jet Dragon was much faster than Sweepa, but Sweepa held firm, laying into the enemy with multiple barrages of ice and power. The fight was on a knife's edge, with neither contender willing to back down. Towards the end, Jet Dragon had both Sweepa and myself at low health. But you know what they say, the darkness is always darkest right before the dawn. And just like the previous two battles before this, Sweepa called to the ice gods for strength and summoned the final ice shard and aimed it directly at Jet Dragon's throat, slaying the beast and bringing a calm to the land. Being able to finally rest, there was only one last thing to do. If you guys made it this far in the video and enjoyed it, please make sure to leave a like and let me know down in the comments below what PAL story you would like to see me do next. Until then, this was the tale of King Sweepa, the unstoppable PAL. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.